Dr. Frank Tamburi is going to give us a few words about the new virus that's running around.
Hello. Thanks, Terry, for a few minutes here. I'm here to hear Charles, so I'm not going to try and hog the mic here. But this coronavirus thing has obviously been a kind of a concern. Just mention a few words on it because it's kind of a loaded topic. Of course, I'm a physician. I play doctor sometimes when I'm not on the microphone. I specialize in prostate cancer pretty well. And by the way, the last Freedom's Phoenix podcast, I spent the after show about 2 hours going over prostate cancer in detail. I've never done that for the show. I always keep it, politics and medicine separate, but so many men have questions on that. So I just kind of delved into it for people that might have questions on PSAs and such. So it's probably a separate episode on Freedom's Phoenix, just an FYI. But anyway, that's my specialty, not viruses. But as a doctor, I probably know a little more than most, but I'm not an expert, so just take it for a grain of salt. And obviously, this is a very fluid situation and who to listen to. And China media is banning things. And, it's just, and anyway, I don't want to comment either on where it came from, whether it's man-made and all this other stuff. I mean, that's a whole other loaded topic. But just a few considerations. First off, with SARS and some of the others, I was never concerned about it. I know other people were. I never was. I didn't, for different reasons. I also, strangely enough, follow plagues in an odd way. There's a video game that you can play that it's taught in medical schools, and you can all download it on your app. It's called Plague Inc. And I have it on my iPad and my iPhone, and I tend to play it whenever I'm on an airplane, when I go to see the patients in other areas. For some reason, I play it on the airplane. It is a fantastic simulator for understanding plagues, whether it's viruses or bacteria, prions, and you basically play the role as the plague, and you choose different categories or different components, whether it's airborne or what the incubation factor is, things like that. And you have to basically destroy humanity. And it's a wry game, but you actually learn quite a bit about the components that go into a plague. So I would recommend it if you're just curious to play with it. The other thing is there's a new show on Netflix that just came out, has nothing to do with the current plague, but it's about the worldwide fight for plagues and on the front line and what people have to do. And it was created, I guess, last year. It's just kind of a coincidence, or maybe not, that it's released now. So check it out on Netflix if you're curious. Just a couple comments on it. First off, the reason I'm more concerned about this plague, or this new variant of the novel coronavirus, is just the incubation time. When I first heard it come out, and many people were poo-pooing it, including myself at first, what changed me on a dime was when I heard the incubation. The average, flu is about 2 to 3 days incubation, meaning that you can have it and you not know it until you have symptoms. The SARS virus was about 5 to 6 days on that, and this one is up to 14 days. And that completely changes the game. And when you play that plague simulator, you understand how much it changes the game for that incubation period. So we just had that one case here in Arizona at ASU, and everyone's thinking, or is it 2 now? So I sit back and I go, okay, well, I don't care. It's one case. Wait for 2 weeks. So everything's a 2-week window at this, which means this is why someone can go around the world a few times and not even know it. The other problem with this thing is that it doesn't, they weren't sure about the transmission for a while. They thought maybe it was airborne. And airborne would be something like measles. Measles is an airborne virus, so it can actually float around on dust particles. That's why measles is so contagious. That's different than an aerosol. An aerosol is, you sneeze and it gets out there. And we were thinking maybe it's aerosol. Might be. It definitely is coming through fluids, because what people in China are starting to figure out, the doctors are getting it even when they're covered head to toe. Guess how they were getting it? Through their eyes, right? So it actually just touching your eyes, it gets through the fluid in your eyes. And so now basically they're selling out of goggles. Everyone's going to the swim store, the pool store, and walking with goggles. I highly recommend that if any of you were trying to protect yourself ahead of time, is to have goggles. If nothing else, it's not necessarily that it's going to float into your eye. It's the fact that you just touch your eye very quickly, and you would definitely be infected. So that's just one of the concerns. But also, it seems to be alive topically, in other words, if it's on a surface, most viruses are up to 48 hours, maybe a couple days. This one, it sounds like it might be up to 28 days that this can last in room temperature on a surface. And this is a whole nother level of transmission because it's all about topical. So even if you're worrying about masks and everything else, it just turns into how much can you not touch in your life, and with keyboards and what have you. In China, if you've been seeing the videos, you know, they're putting toothpicks on cork boards in the elevators. You guys see that? Okay, some of you say, so I mean, when you go to, they're jerry-rigging everything, where they have a cork board in elevators, and there's a guy's job with gloves, and he puts toothpicks into the cork board. You okay, Arnie? You all right?
No, I just twanged my wrist.
Oh, wow. I was like, you were like, I want your pain back there. I was sorry. So anyway, whenever you go into the elevator, you go and you actually pick one unique toothpick. You use it to push the button on the elevator and then dispose it into a little trash can. So, I mean, they're doing everything not to touch anything. Rubber gloves, rubber gloves, obviously, not just to not touch or contaminate, but just to remind you of not just to touch your face. Just simple things. Just scratch yourself. Don't pick your nose, rub your eyes. I mean, these are just common things you don't think about. The other problem, China has it really bad for a number of reasons. One is the state media banning everything, and that's a whole other problem, right? We already know that. That's the first problem. Second problem is it seems to be affecting people that have more of possibly Middle East background, definitely Asian, and Asian men, it seems to have it more. They don't have a certain enzyme, apparently, to break down a resistance factor. So Asian men are getting it more than Asian women. That's one part. So they're getting hit more. Another reason that this is a problem is cleanliness or lack of. Now, I went to school in Japan. I've spent time in China, outbacks in the Philippines. They don't really believe in washing hands at all. I mean, most people in China, especially mainland China, don't even use soap. To them, they actually sometimes will wipe their behind with their hands. Honestly, I know you guys are eating. Sorry about that, but and then they'll just wash their hands just very quickly with water, and then turn off the sink with the same hands, which they did. Without soap, you're not going to get rid of anything that's on there, especially elements that are lipophilic. So things that are fat soluble versus, of course, water soluble. And viruses like this can live in fat soluble components. So if you don't use soap, you're not going to it's all around. So the Chinese culture is that way. One of the things that I've learned is having strong immune function. Americans, we kind of poo-poo ourselves or pamper ourselves a bit. I often point out that who has a stronger immune system, an American or a Mexican, because I find it interesting that Americans, we drink our little smart water and food reverse distill, blah, 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 and you go down to Mexico in one day and you can't drink the water and you get sick, and the Mexicans are drinking it just fine. So the question is, who has the stronger immune system? I'm just saying. So I think sometimes having dust and bugs around you, it actually enhances your immune system. I think Americans have created a problem indirectly. With that said, the Chinese have really strong immune systems because they're around just filth all the day. I shouldn't put it that way, but I mean just the E. coli and the way they touch, but they have strong immune systems that way. But unfortunately, this virus really will percolate and transmit through that type of world. So you have a number of things, all factors put together. But they're quarantining full cities and such. The point is that you have a 2-week incubation period, and that's really the killer. So to give you one last sense, and I'm probably almost out of time here, but there's the average flu, they have what's called an R0 factor. You guys know about the R0 factor? How many of you have heard of that? That is when you look at incubation periods, that's one of the primary things to look at for a virus. It's called the R0 or R0. The British call it R0. But anyway, it's the transmission rate of one person to another. So if I have a virus, if one person has a virus, how many people will you infect on average in one cycle of the virus? Okay, so a virus goes through a cycle. So the average flu, for instance, is 1.28. That means that one person can infect 1.28 other people in one cycle of the virus. And then if you bring that out about 20 cycles of the virus, you can calculate how many people exponentially will get it. And so with the average flu, I think it comes out to, don't quote me, it's like I don't know, a few thousand people, or maybe it's like 100,000 or less, at an R0 of 1.28. Okay, SARS I think was close to 2.0, somewhere around, which is pretty infectious. Okay, this sucker, because of all the factors I mentioned, being able to sit on a table for 28 days and then touching everywhere and all these considerations, it has, they think, an R0 factor up to 4.0. And when you calculate that after 20 cycles, it will infect, according, if you just follow the numbers, 344 billion people in 20 cycles. Now, there's only, 7 or 8 billion people on the planet. So what it means is something like this, uncontrolled, kind of like a wildfire with a tornado behind it, just can hit everyone at once. So that's the concern about it. Yeah, do you have a question?
Did I not hear that this can transfer to pets also, your pets and animals?
Well, it could. I don't know. I mean, the vector seems to come from bats. We know genetically it probably came from a bat. And I know there's, maybe human-made and all this, but the thing is, the sequence is very similar to bats, and the other SARS virus, it seems to be from bats. Bats will then infect, these wild animals. The thing is, the wild animals that we think probably had it, a cheetah or something, cheetahs are not normally in contact with human beings where the fluid of a cheetah is going to get you. But that's why it seems like all the original cases came from this wild animal market with animals that normally humans would never be around. And of course, they slaughter the animals. Any of you who've been overseas, you kind of know, you go to some animal market and they just, they just cut it up right there on the street and wash it down with a hose afterwards. I mean, this is kind of what goes on. So that's how you can get fluid from a wild animal. It should never even be in contact with you. So it probably jumped ship from that direction and gone from there. So anyway, I just want to point that out. And also one last point about the death rate from it. And again, it's wildly speculative because China has been hiding much. Stefan Molyneux, to be honest, of all the medical sites I've been listening, Stefan Molyneux has a really good podcast. He has a lot of good people from China who've been listeners of his show, and he's doing in-depth talks, hearing people who've been skeptical of the state and know how to read state media and the doctors themselves. It's a good resource to hear some of this, but he's someone that many of you are familiar with already. Yeah, he's actually pretty good. There's some other sites too, and I'll mention to Ernie and put it on the pod on his website. But anyway, the thing is, there's a question about how lethal is it, and it seems to be definitely it's more lethal than the average flu. The average flu, I think, is like about 2%. Mortality, and then I think SARS was a little bit more. This one's about 7% mortality. Now, some of you are going to say, wait a minute, I heard it's 20%. Yes, and here's where the difference seems to be. That it's 7%, which is a lot, obviously it's a problem, but it's 7% in a normal situation with normal health care. There's another factor when you look at viruses or transmissions, which is what's called the SCU number, which we look at as the ICU. Think of it as how many people, when they get it, need to have ICU care to survive it, okay? And so the thing is, with ICU care, when you're being put into into ICU unit, you can survive these viruses at a much greater percentage, and that's why mortality is only 7%. The problem is that you need an ICU bed. There's only about 94,000 ICU units in America, right? And they're almost normally towards capacity. And they kind of play the ICU bed sort of like your airline, where they kind of overbook airlines and then sometimes they underbook. They play this game to maximize, the seats, that sort of thing. Well, hospitals do the same thing. They try to find a way to maximize the hospital beds, and they count a buffer for flu season, because flu season, 2% might need ICU beds. Well, this one is technically around 7%. So you need more ICU beds. We get that. The problem is if you have this R naught factor where everyone gets it at once, no one knows they have it, and then everyone in the community gets sick at the same time. The reason that you're hearing 20% mortality is not necessarily that the virus is that much worse compared to the flu, which it is by a few percent. It's the fact that everyone flooding the hospital at the same time, there's not enough ICU beds, and therefore people are stuck in the hallways in hospitals, which you guys are seeing videos, and then they're surrounded by other sick people who already all have low immune system, and the virus is going like crazy in the hospitals. You can't even be in the hospital. So that's why the death rate seems to be higher. It's not just the virus, it's the collapse of the medical system trying to handle all this at the same time. So the best thing is to stay away from the hospital and quarantine yourself in a sense. And that's something I know many of us, I don't have to talk about. Excuse me, it's been a long morning here. My 2-year-old was up 2 times last night, so I'm a little tired. But to quarantine yourself in a sense. And that's a whole other deal about, whether goggles and tissues and getting things from the store. And not I'm trying to make some panic issue about it, but it's one of those things, I'm sure Ernie and many of you know, that when something like this happens, and no one seems to see it, and when it happens quick at once, and then people go cuckoo. It's not The Walking Dead. People aren't going to be dying all over necessarily, but it's something that I could see, conceivably, this country doing a quarantine, like a 2-week quarantine, except for emergency services, if it gets that bad, to allow this thing to blow through at once. So it's just a concern, yeah.
Frank, any chances we're turning into a pandemic like the Spanish flu in the early 90s?
That's exactly Spanish flu, and that's a concern. I mean, it's not as deadly as Spanish flu, but as far as a pandemic, it's very possible, because that R naught, I can't stress enough, that R naught factor is a real issue. So anyway, on the show we talked about some anti-immune issues. We talked about the anti-plague formula. I'll just give it to you really quick. It's probably the best natural treatment out there, and it's not just some woo-woo thing. This is something that's it's like the number one thing I learned in medical school as far as antimicrobial, enhances your immune system. I've seen it kick out high urinary tract infections, like a pyelonephritis that normally you have to take Cipro for. And we've talked on the show, I'll do it really quick, but you can buy it from the store cheap and easy. It's garlic, onion, horseradish root, the fresh horseradish, not the stuff in the jar, and apple cider vinegar. And you grind them up together into just like puree. It's like an applesauce consistency. It will not taste like applesauce. But anyway, and then you put a couple pinches of cayenne pepper separate on top, and that is the classic anti-plague formula. And it works better than many antibiotics, and also it's antiviral, which of course antibiotics are not. So my family, we're already getting all the ingredients for it to make it for reserve. But it's something I just want to at least throw one thing out to you that could be very helpful. Yeah. Sure, it's garlic, onion, horseradish root, apple cider vinegar, equal parts, and you put them together with cayenne pepper. I don't want to take too much time from Charles. Yeah.
What do you think about colloidal silver as an inhibitor to bacteria?
Oh yeah, colloidal silver would be fantastic as well. Yeah, you can do that. But just be aware about the transmission. That's the main thing. And actually, Charles, before you go, actually, I was just about to mention a point with Charles. You have to hit the bathroom?
I'm going to wash my hands.
Oh, sorry. All right, you go ahead. I'll comment when you get back. Okay. Jeez. Sorry, I'm like grilling Charles and can't leave. Yeah.
Just one more question about the anti-plague formula. Do you take a tablespoon, teaspoon?
Yeah, well, we usually, basically, if you're a smaller petite person, then a teaspoon 3-4 times a day. Guys like me, or most people, I think, most adults, a tablespoon 3-4 times a day. And if you're Italian, it makes a good cologne, Yeah.
Is that on an empty stomach or with
Either way. It depends how much you can handle it. I will say, when people tend to be sick and they do this, sometimes if you can't take it straight, some people can't. It makes a good salad dressing. You can put it on salad with crackers. It's kind of a way to get it down. But it's highly effective, guys. And I'm not just... again, it's not just one of these, oh yeah, try that. The science behind every one of them, onion, garlic especially, they break down disulfide bonds, which is what bacteria and viruses actually use. So that's why it's also so pungent, and you can smell it through your fingers, and it gets into your lungs because it gets everywhere, chases down what's there. So it's highly effective. Sure, yeah. So that's just a few comments there on the virus. They in China though, they were talking about also it's interesting how it's affecting all the elderly. So be aware, if you have a low immune system, that's another reason I'm talking to this group. The lower your immune system, the more it can take you out. So that 7%, it's not going to affect probably people like me, although it could, because that very healthy doctor, who's 35 years old, died from it. Right? Granted, he was exposed to it quite a bit in high-risk areas, and he was not allowed to. They gave him oxygen. They didn't give him an actual incubator. Sure, yeah. I never heard that question. Yeah, I guess you could. Maybe raw. Just keep in mind, if it's a bacteria, though, that bacteria likes sugar. So you try to avoid the sugar that you can. But if it helps it get down a little bit, and with a virus, it doesn't matter. So yeah, I'm sure it's fine. All right, yeah. Garlic, onion, red onion I prefer, but either one. Horseradish root, apple cider vinegar. And then cayenne pepper is just a little bit extra at the end. Do not put cayenne pepper equal parts because you'll be really sick, okay? That's why I always say keep that separate. But it's highly effective for there. So yeah, I think that's about it. But I wanted to, when Charles gets back here, I wanted to just segue. Yeah, question? Yeah, it's a good question. We don't know. I mean, it's a novel one. We don't know. I mean, in theory, I guess you would be. Oh, and by the way, as far as the virus and with vaccines, which I know is a fun topic for Ernie as well, but they're looking at, just an FYI, about 3 months to create the vaccine for this. To even create it, and then it'll be about 8 months to mass produce it. So we're looking at a year to have the vaccine, even if, whether people take it or not. The kicker is this thing is probably, because it transmits so quick and so many people have it at once, the more people that have it, the more opportunity a virus has to mutate. So the irony is, by the time they even have a virus, it's probably going to be a whole different deal anyway. That's very possible. Yeah. Also with porous features, just so you know, like this wood, the wood table, that's where this thing will live longer. If you have like granite tops or anything really smooth, the virus has a harder time being on there, and you can clean it better. So just keep those things in mind, and I'm sure whatever precautions you have about being in the store and having water and food and things available in case there is a quarantine. Again, I don't want to say this like a scare tactic, but of every virus I've seen, this is the only one that I could see them doing just for precautions. That's why they have these cruise ships they're banning for two weeks. They're keeping them quarantined. You always hear 2 weeks. It's because a sucker has a 14-day R0 factor or incubation factor, which is a 4-point R0. So the last thing, since Charles is back, and sorry I didn't mean to grill you on your way out, my friend. It's like authority, do you have your papers? The reason I was segueing to Charles a little bit is it's an interesting thing. Peter Schiff and many others, and probably Charles, have said about the economy that people say, well, when's it going to happen, Charles? Tell me when. People want to nail down people about the economy, which is an unfair question. But like Peter will say, the economy debt bubble is a balloon looking for a pin to pop it. And it's always where you least expect it. And there's many people wondering if this could be it, because if you think about it, China's shutting down whole cities and people are not working. They're extending the Chinese New Year out to just calm people down. But they make all of our crap. They make everything. And then we're using our dollars to buy their stuff so they can buy treasury bills from us and keep this debt thing going. So the thing is that if they can't make anything, and then if we're quarantined, we can't buy anything, the question is, can that lead to a problem? And now eventually, if they're quarantined, we can't buy from them. Then the theory is we would buy from Mexico or India somewhere else. But then again, unless they're going to buy our T-bills or what have you, it's just a mess, and just makes you think that if it is a pandemic, if it hit the world that quickly at once, what would it do to markets? And I don't know how temperamental that could be. And that's just a kind of a thought maybe for Charles, if you'd like to comment. But go ahead.
Just a thought, when it hits Mexico,
Yeah.
people are being up north for healthcare.
Yeah.
What are we going to do? Machine gun coming across the border?
Yeah, and that brings a whole other thing about border security. So a lot of things will be brought up, and when I'm going to be done, but I'll tell you, if it does hit America too, and the whole healthcare system gets overwhelmed, and this happens before the next election, what if Bernie Sanders winds up being the nominee? I know you'll be happy, but I'm just saying it could definitely throw a kink in how people look at the medical system if people just see this as the whole, a problem. So there's a lot of what ifs. I don't want to speculate too much. I guess I am, but it's just a thing in flux. Keep yourself educated. I'm sure with Freedom's Phoenix, we'll try and bring info whatever that we know. Okay. Anyway, I hope that helps a bit. And sorry for taking time from Charles.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Ernie has a few words for us. He doesn't need the microphone, so.
Egg timer for 3 to 5 minutes, pinky swear. The Love Bus Liberty Tour, I just got back from New Hampshire, and we bought the bus. We've been working on it, just making sure everything, all the systems, checking it, it's in really good shape. And, but what I hate more than anything else is working on greasy diesel buses in sleet, snow outside. Sucks. Sucks, 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 sucks. And then you can't just run down to the store for that little $1.39 part. It's a 30-mile, 3-stage stop to put the, I hate that crap. So anyway, what we're doing is I'll go back in March sometime, probably towards the middle end of March, and we'll spend another week installing the studio. So we're going to be putting the studio in and all that. It looks like middle of May we leave. I'd like to hit the Soho debate in New York on May 10th between Scott Horton and Bill Kristol, you know. Regime change is a good foreign policy, you know, that'll be interesting. Then we have the Libertarian National Convention at the end of May, and then we're going to New Hampshire for probably about a month. What has happened is I didn't realize how much when a lot of the people on the vaccine issue went to California and Washington State, and New York, and all this stuff, New Jersey had 8,000 people in front of the Capitol against doing away with exemptions and create more mandates. This is a big issue. It is, and it's already being won by the people. I don't, you know, I get on my surfboard when I got a big wave. Man, I'm going to ride this bad boy for a year. This thing is going to be huge. A lot of people are going to have to stay after school on this one. But here we have the coronavirus. Couldn't have been timed better, you know? You definitely need to, you know, get a shot. Well, my thing is that these things come and go all the time. This one, it might, you know, you got all the issues, but it doesn't matter. The solution is still the same. Freedom's the answer. What's the question? And you need to have a strong immune system. Now, I've done years ago, I've done the plague thing. I know when it starts getting bad, it's in our refrigerator, and it does not taste good. Okay, I just want, you know, if you survive it, then you know you're alive. It's that kind of thing, right? So, and it's really horseradishy, but I kind of felt a little tickle around Christmas, do some oil of oregano, little zinc tablets, colloidal silver, and I make it. I go back east, flying on a plane from Chicago and everything. A couple of people wearing a mask and so on. Hardly any coughing, nobody's sick, you know, whatever. I don't know, but I think people are starting to get healthier. They're starting to back away from the pharmaceuticals a little bit more, do what Grandma said, and they're surviving it. And I'm concerned that they, them, those do not want us to be able to have a strong immune system and we not be in need of a lot of this stuff. So I'm worried. This is, you know, it's who benefits from us getting all sick, and certainly the, you know, the hype around it. So I advocate for a strong immune system. This is a big movement in New Hampshire. I went to a thing, the Free State Project has a summer event called Porcupine Freedom Festival. It's called Pork Fest. Now, the winter one they do in February is called Liberty Forum, and they have, you know, big speakers and so on. So I went there and passed out, you know, you see here in our pirate books and all that kind of stuff. So it's taken off. What I found out is that there's a group of 1,500 people that have been in protest just in one group in New Hampshire. This mandate exemption thing, vaccine, is huge back there, and Big Pharma do not like it. So when we're doing this, it's a LLC with a bus registration with a statutory agent of Montana, blah, 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 you know? And I'm like, hey, man, Ernie who? I don't know what you're talking about. So it's like when we did the Levolution, it was 9 months or something before it was. Brian Doherty from Reason did an article that had me in there. Up until that time, it wasn't common knowledge that, you know, we were behind the scenes pushing this thing. And even months later, before our patrons, you know, they got outed. But by then it was too late. Well, that's what we're trying to. It's going to be difficult for us to do it with this issue because, man, they're out there. They want to. We can put, you know, stop strips in front of his bus or something. I mean, you know, paint a, you know, Amazon logo on the top so the drone can find me with the Hellfire missile or whatever. So this is it. It's serious what we're doing. We're getting ready, and it will be a thing. Charles. How many of you remember when Charles was on the radio here in the Valley? You know, so a lot, you know, enough, okay? So you know who Charles is. I am so glad that Charles is here to give his perspective on anything, because he's the only talk show host I ever knew, worked with, that read the entire book of every guest that had a book. You know, I mean, he's like, so on page 372, you said. You know, so damn it, don't do Charles. The big influence here in the Valley, big influence nationally. New York Times best-selling author, 2 books to his name, and got a 3rd coming out, son, don't you? So we're going to get, and it's always right when there's a crisis, you know? We need Charles to explain it to us. So here he comes again, you know, and it be a coming. Charles Goyette.
So I'd rather have Ernie Hancock introduce me than any other person on the face of the earth. I'm always honored. I am really grateful to be here with you guys, because it's kind of like a coming out party for me. I have laid low for a long time, and I can't tell you exactly why, except that I've been so out of touch with my times and my country and the people and the current intellectual trends of our era that I just felt like I just wanted to step away, and I can't tell you why either, but I've decided to kind of come back in and now be more visible. So I'm very grateful, Terry and Renee and all of you, for inviting me here, because this is the first time I've really come out to say something about something that won't be new to you, and I need a familiar, friendly audience anyway, you know, because I'm just now coming back out, right? So, but I consider this like home turf for me in a way. When my dad died back in the early 70s, I was going through his material and I found a correspondence between him and Harry Everingham. And I can't remember all these years later what exactly it was about. But I've been tied to this club in a way that's kind of not obvious. I last spoke here, I guess, 8 or 9 years ago. But I've been here in the 70s and 80s, and in fact, I want to tell you, of course, I've got a long professional and friendship relationship with Ernie. So, you know, he's very much, you know, in the DNA of this organization. But I want to tell you about something that goes way back. And Harry Everingham's friend, and the person that did, I guess, kind of what Renee does for the Arizona Breakfast Club now, and the secretary in his business activities, was a woman by the name of Agnes Murphy. And Agnes Murphy was a political activist, and she was the chairman of her legislative district in Central Phoenix. And I have a warm spot in my heart for her. She passed away many years ago. I had a warm spot in my heart for her because she, when a seat opened up in the Arizona State Senate, I lived in her district at the time, and she encouraged me to run for it, and she was going to pull all the strings and use her influence and stuff to make sure that nobody else ran, and that I got, you know, and it was sort of a foregone conclusion that if you ran in that district as a Republican, you got elected because there weren't any other people in the district and stuff. And it was very flattering and very nice, but as it happened, I ended up buying a house outside the district a couple months later, and I was too busy in business and I didn't want to do it. But anyway, I always thought that was really nice. But here's what I really like about Agnes Murphy. She was a delegate to the 1980 Republican Convention. She was that's the convention that nominated Ronald Reagan. And she was a tough bird. And so Reagan was nominated, and then he selected George Bush the elder to be his running mate. So then it's time for all the states to vote for George Bush on the ballot, that George Bush is going to be on the ballot and he's going to be the running mate. Well, Agnes's head practically exploded. She wasn't having any part of that. And, you know, people, the astute people that, you know, knew what was going on and knew a little about her, knew she was going to cause trouble for this national convention. And she's sitting there, and I imagine it's steam pouring out of her ears about George Bush. And John Colby was the political columnist for the Arizona Gazette at the time, and he could see something was going on, and he ran up to where the Arizona convention was, or delegation was, and, you know, wanted to see what was going on. Tom Pappas, some of you may remember the name, who was the chairman of the Arizona Republican Party at the time, saw he had a problem too, and he ran up there, and they started arm twisting her. you know, not to refuse, not to be the one delegate in the entire convention to refuse to nominate George Bush as vice president. They wanted a nomination by acclamation, and she wasn't going to be part of it. And they're saying things to her like, this is what the account she gave me. They're saying things to her like, don't embarrass Arizona. And finally, you know, the pressure got to her, and she said, well, I'm not going to vote for him, but I'll give up my seat and let an alternate take my seat, and I'm going to go home. And so she didn't vote for George Bush. Now, looking back, I think most of us that aren't mentally flatlined, you know, would have been very proud of her. They're telling her, don't embarrass Arizona. We'd have remembered her as a hero all these years later if she had had a chance to go up there and say, no, I don't support George Bush as vice president, and it's not going to be by acclamation. There's going to be at least one holdout. You know, there was a holdout for Richard Nixon in 1968, a delegate by the name of Roger McBride in the Electoral College. And he voted for the Libertarian, and it was a huge embarrassment to the president, and good thing at that. And
Who was the Libertarian?
The delegate was Roger McBride. The candidate, I can't remember his name. So I don't know, it's whoever it was. But
the first woman to ever receive electoral college vote.
okay. So anyway, it's great to be here at this particular organization and come out and come speak about things. SARS aside, the Spanish flu aside, the coronavirus and all its permutations aside, even without that, Western civilization is on the brink. And you should be able to see it. You know, we're like a snake that needs to shed its skin. There's something transformational going on in this country. Everybody's at odds with one another. Everybody hates their neighbors. They can't get along in their families. It's never been quite as polarized as it is today. But this is a prelude to an important transformation of the entire country, like shedding its skin. And I use the image of a snake shedding its skin because, you know, in literature, even in the biblical stories, in literature, the snake is always a symbol of some new leap in consciousness, knowledge of from the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, for example. The serpent always presages some transformation. Jung talked to his patients about that. If they dream about a snake, he would say, oh, you know, there's some transformation in your awareness, your understanding of your situation in life that is about to take place. So I think that's a pretty good image for what is going on now. And to cut to the chase, my belief is that we will find at the end of this, I don't mean a transformation, you know, of something that's gone on for 100 years or something. I mean a transformation of the kind of mind frame that has persisted for thousands of years, a couple of thousands of years. And the other side of this transformation, whether it's done easily or done in a difficult and unhappy manner, is the end of politics. And by that I mean effectively the end of government. Now, I'm not telling you that there won't be, you know, remnants of what we think of as government, but we're going to have to find that government has run its course, and it needs to go the way of the tribal chieftain. Oh, well, who will tell us how to live if the tribal chieftain doesn't tell us? And it's going to have to go the way of you know, the king. Oh, who will tell us who to go to war with if the king doesn't tell us who to take up arms against? And it's going to have to go the way of you know, the sovereign church. Oh, who's going to tell us what to think and how to behave if the church doesn't tell us how to think and what to behave? And so if I tell people today, this room excluded, that government's going to have to come to an end as we know it, they go, well, who's going to tell us how to live together if we don't have government? Well, we've been through that before with tribal chieftains and kings and churches and stuff. So there is something on the other side. And I'll give you a hint of what I kind of think of. I have a friend who worked years ago, is a New York Times bestselling author of a number of books, worked on a book called Remission, about spontaneous remission in health crises. And to my astonishment, and maybe if anybody in the room knows it, Frank probably already knows it, but to my astonishment, there is a degree of the incidence of remission for every disease. Every single one has some degree of remission. Now this is huge. If you can have spontaneous remission of disease, why aren't we looking at that phenomenon instead of pouring money into, national health care? And a better example, I think, is the placebo effect. The way we look at things, we treat the placebo effect as a problem. We screen against the placebo effect. Oh, we don't want our results screwed up by the placebo effect, interfering and screwing up everything and restoring the person's health. It's the biggest no-brainer in the world. What is going on with the placebo effect? So the transformation of the entire culture will benefit after the long, difficult transitional period. I have a friend working on a book right now about called Terminal Lucidity. You have people that are in almost vegetative states that are non-communicative. They can't hear, they can't understand, they can't talk. They lay in bed waiting to die. And then suddenly they come to, fully alert. And the general model is, that they gather, they call for their family and loved ones to come around them, and they talk to them each about, fully alert, talk to them each about what they've meant in their life and how much they love them and so on and so forth, and then they die 2 days later. It's a period of lucidity at the end of their life when they're not supposed to, they're organically not capable of functioning. This stuff is hugely important. And it's more important than Obamacare and all of these things going on in Washington. And we've got to break away from believing that the solution, look, it transforms the economics of healthcare is transformed once you get rid of government. Once you get government out of the picture and you start looking at things like the placebo effect. Well, it's my view, and it's not prejudicial against our fellow Americans, but that Americans are extremely naive and really ill-prepared for a major cultural transition. And I say it's just a factor of the way that we've grown up. Americans believe, for example, that because of a relatively short and isolated history, they believe that the government will always be the government. It's always been the government, and it'll always be the money. Oh, the money will always be the money. Now, you get people in a lot of the rest of the world. Take Europe. You get people in Europe, places like Italy and Greece. They are surrounded by the monuments and the statues and the antiquarian evidence that the government isn't always the government. That these dukes and kings and princes and, corporals that have led their country into massive warfare and so on, they come and go all the time, and the evidence is all around them. So if somebody says, oh, the government will always be the government, well, it's always been the government since we've been on this continent. It's always been the government since 1789. It's always been national government model. It's always going to be there. That's what Americans think by default, because they don't really think about it. And the money. Oh, they think, Americans think the money will always be the money. It's these pieces of paper. And, in the last 50 years or so, we've had 3 forms of the U.S. dollar. Americans don't realize that. We had the gold dollar, we had the gold exchange dollar, and now we have the dollar. It's exchangeable, it's not gold, and it's not exchangeable, and it's just the dollar. And, but nobody realizes that the dollar has changed. Now, in places like elsewhere in the world, like in Brazil, they've, in the last, I would say 30 years, they probably had 5 different currencies. So they're not like Americans, in the rest of the world that think the government will always be the government, and they think that the money will always be the money. What is at risk in this transformational shift that will happen and in fact is already underway? We are all in the West appropriately, as we should be, absolutely dazzled by the gifts and the blessings of technology. Things like modern dentistry and, going all the way back to when they laid the transatlantic cable. Can you imagine what an achievement that was? And, airplanes and air travel and the electronic and the digital revolutions and all these things. And they dazzle us, and they're wonderful things, and they're liberating, and they're great. And The achievements aren't to be belittled, and certainly they won't be by somebody like me. We had, in 1990, we had childhood deaths around the world of 12 million a year, childhood deaths for medical reasons. That's down to 5 million a year now. 122 million kids' lives have been saved just since 1990 because of, the improvements, the reach of Western civilization into places that were more primitive have accomplished this. We had in 1990 a third of the world that lived in extreme poverty. Today it's down to 10%. All this is wonderful, and it's a gift again of the natural sciences. Well, the natural sciences, all of these sciences, they overwhelm us with their achievements and their accomplishments and stuff, and so we look at them as the harbingers of prosperity and success, and they are. But in the process, we overlook things that are not the natural sciences. And I mean some of the things like the psycho and the social sciences about how we live together. And some of the things that we will miss then in not revering those other gifts that are so important are things like the presumption of innocence. It's a gift of Western civilization. You have civil asset forfeiture, for example. Is evidence that the presumption of innocence is becoming a thing of the past. You have, what about equal treatment before the law? Justice is blind. So, Martha Stewart goes to jail, and James Clapper, is out walking around free. And it's even worse than that. We're not ever going to get him because the statute of limitations on Clapper for lying to Congress under oath expired 2 years ago. So these guys get off scot-free. Free speech, we're going to miss that accomplishment of Western civilization. I mean, you got liberal comedians won't go on college campuses today because they're under attack. So there is a great deal of beauty in the discoveries of the natural sciences that I've described as liberating and transforming our lives and all these miracles of modern life. And if you ponder some of them, if you pause to just, to consider them standing alone, it's a little transformative. It puts you in a state of awe to realize what a beautiful, not just useful, not just functional, but what a beautiful thing some of the discoveries of modern civilization in the natural sciences are. Like, I'll give you the Pythagorean theorem. I mean, it's so old now, if we all learned it in school, we never use it in our modern lives, and it's been around for thousands of years, and so, it's not really valued. But if you were to pause and think about it, this is a problem of this is a one-dimensional problem. What is the length of this hypotenuse, right? One-dimensional. But somebody realized that the problem isn't, you're not looking just for a one-dimensional solution. You're looking at a two-dimensional problem, the triangle itself. And so the answer was found instead of trying to figure out with one-dimensional tools how to figure out the length of a one-dimensional hypotenuse. You transform it into a two-dimensional measurement of that hypotenuse and the sides of the triangle. You square them, and there's the solution yielded to you. My favorite example, I grew up in Flagstaff, right at the base of Mars Hill where Lowell Observatory is, and I spent as many hours as I could possibly do at Lowell Observatory and made friends of the astronomers up there, and I tried to help, and like a big project like rearranging the library and stuff. I'd always go up there and try to do things. This is one of my favorite things. This is a discovery of such pure beauty that it should just almost make you laugh. It's Kepler's laws of planetary motion. So Kepler discovered, just for ease, I'm going to just pretend that the orbits of the planets are circular. They're elliptical, but just to make it easier to understand, Kepler says, the orbit of the planets sweep out equal areas in equal times. Let me explain what that means to you. It takes Mercury 88 days to go around the sun. So how much area, if you create a radius between the sun and Mercury, and you take it around that 88 days, how much area, how many million square miles does it cover, is encompassed in that, in measuring that radius? Well, the peculiar thing is that whatever that number is, and I used to kind of know what it was, in 88 days of the Earth's orbit around the sun, so it's, what is that, like a quarter of the year. In 88 days, the radius from the sun to the Earth sweeps out the exact same amount of area as Mercury does. And in 365 days that we go around once, if you applied that, how many square miles is that area within that radius? That's the same area that Jupiter sweeps out in 365 days. Now this is an astonishing thing of great beauty if you don't have to just, you know, they teach it to you in school, you have to learn it, it works like this, like Kepler's first law, second law, third law, yada, yada, yada. But think about how beautiful, how remarkable that is. You know, it's just a thing of, I think it's just a stunning marvel and a source of great joy to pause and think about those things. But you know, there are achievements of Western civilization that don't have anything to do with the physical sciences or the natural sciences, but more the human sciences or the psycho or social sciences that are equally beautiful, that we learn about, but we don't approach and let them work on us so that we can marvel at them in the same way. And many of them are incorporated in the common law that we inherited from the British, like, and are found in our Bill of Rights. Like, you know, the Fifth Amendment, it's valuable, but it's really the world's first meaningful anti-torture device. You know, so when you know, American leaders and politicians and stuff start talking about or excusing or running interference for illegal torture, they are betraying something very fundamental at the root of American civilization. So the assault on Western civilization that we're all witnessing, I mean, you see it every day, you can hardly get away from it. You know, speakers being met with violent resistance on college campuses. You've got, oh, here's one, Stanford University. Used to be a great academic institution. Stanford University just admitted somebody whose admission essay, for his admission essay he wrote, Black Lives Matter 100 times. And so they admitted him. You know, and I see this stuff all the time. There's a Wall Street Journal story not too long ago about, you know, the problem with economics is there aren't enough women economists. Now, I have been in the economic debate for a long time, and with people like Milton Friedman and Murray Rothbard, and never have I heard anybody challenging ideas, promoting ideas and stuff, talking about whether their roots are from a male or a female. You know, nobody cares because they're supposed to care about the truth of the idea. And I saw last week, and you're all familiar with this too, I'm sorry to reiterate what you already know. I saw last week the curriculum for a gender equity teaching of mathematics in the public schools. I know, and it's not that you just take, you know, Bill and Dick go to the store, they have 23 cents between them, and they go to and then they replace those names with girls' names, you know, Sally and Jean go to the, you know, it's not just that. It was unbelievable, and I was so aghast, and I lost it, and I thought, well, I'm going to bring it here and tell you guys about it. Went looking for it, and I thought, no, I don't need to do that because you know that this stuff, this identity politics stuff is going on, you know, but it's a serious blow to Western civilization. Just on a lighter side, I learned the other day that yoga is a white supremacy aggression. Yeah, the peaceful practice of yoga, the white supremacy aggression by the yoga industrial complex. You know, now they can let the military industrial complex, the spy surveillance eavesdropping complex go by the boards, but oh, they're all worked up about the yoga industrial complex. My granddaughter was a perpetrator of cultural appropriation for Halloween a year or so ago when she went trick-or-treating as Moana, the Disney character, because she's a blonde And she's not from the South Pacific or wherever Moana is. So, but anyway, how does all this stuff enforced? It's enforced with fear, you know, that nobody is allowed to speak. You know, freedom of speech, gone, disappearing, going down the rabbit hole is gone in this country because people give in to fear. And I went through some of this in my opposition to the Iraq War. I was so toxic in a warmongering environment that there were people in the hallways that had been my friends that would see me coming, and they'd go take a long detour so they didn't have to interact with me. I had this, I tell this story once every 5 years, so this is it for the next 5 years. When you know, they were trying to figure out how to get rid of me, I had the senior executive of all talk senior executives nationally in this entire country, and I was working for Clear Channel, which owned all the biggest talk stations in the United States. And this guy was given the challenge, you've got to figure out what to do about Charles Goyette. You know, he's not going along with the program. So, you know, we talked about it, and he'd call me and we'd talk about it, and he'd say, you know, you have to do this. I say, I can't do that. Well, one day, he called me at home at night. He said, he had told me that afternoon when we were discussing my predicament. He said, well, Charles, you know, I agree with you about this Iraq War debacle, but here's what you need to do. And then he called me at home that night, and his voice is fairly quaking. And he said, you know, Charles, I'd appreciate it if you don't tell anybody what I told you about what I think, you know, because nobody else knows. And I said, well, don't worry, you know, this is my cross to bear, it's not yours, and, you know. Anyway, so I never did tell anybody his name, but everybody in the talk radio industry in the United States of America knows exactly who he is. But it works like this even at the level of the deep state guys, the deepest of the deep state guys. This is the preeminent establishment character. The guy's name is Leslie Gelb. And I want to read you, it goes on so long I would risk boring you if I read you all he's done. But listen, PhD from Harvard, New York Times correspondent, New York Times editor, New York Times columnist, President Emeritus of the Council of Foreign Relations. He was an official of the Defense Department, senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. He was Assistant Secretary of State. He was senior associate at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, board member of the Carnegie Endowment, board member of Columbia University's School of International Relations and Public Affairs, board member of Rice University's James Baker Institute, board member of Brown University's Watson Institute for International Studies, board member of the John F. Kennedy School of Government. Now that is the establishment resume par excellence, right? You guys in media, government, think tanks. So finally in 2009, when it didn't matter anymore, he wrote an article about his support for the, you know, guys were running away from, by 2009, people were starting to run away from the Iraq War. And even, I'm told that even John McCain backpedaled. I know George Will and William F. Buckley tried to disown it. People tried to disown it everywhere. He said in 2009, he wrote in an academic article, I don't remember what publication it was, he wrote, my initial support for the war was symptomatic of unfortunate tendencies within the foreign policy community, namely the disposition and incentives to support wars, to retain political and professional credibility. Now, I don't know what your religious or spiritual beliefs are, but how would you like to go meet your maker? All the wisdom traditions of mankind have sort of a, you know, your soul is weighed in judgment, a feather on this scale, and your accomplishments on the other, of whatever religion. You know, the near-death experience, life review, right? How would you like to go to your life review or to meet your maker and have to say, well, you know, I stood by idly from a position of authority and influence while untold thousands of people met their slaughter because I wanted to maintain my political and professional credibility. You know, it's sad, but it's criminal. Allie and I debated. This is my wife, Allie, here. If any of you need any real estate, she's been doing it for like 27 years. Her clients love her almost as much as I do. So, but anyway, that's not why she's here. She's here for moral support for me. But
Charles, if I become a client, do I get to love her almost as much as you do?
you know, when I met her, I took her card and I said, I don't need any real estate, but I'm keeping this card. So, we discussed on the way up here whether I should use President Trump's term shithole. And if it's okay with you, I don't normally talk like that. We don't talk like that around the house, but I mean, everybody knows what he said. And you know, if I've tried to find a way around it, you'd know what I meant, right? It'd be kind of phony. So I'll just say, I want to take you back to shitholes and defending Western civilization. And during the aftermath of his comment about these shithole countries, there was a commentator, a very famous commentator on CNN, and somebody said, well, would you rather live in Haiti or in Norway? She said, I can't say. Like Leslie Gelb, you know, there's a great deal of cowardice. She knew what she thought, but she was afraid to say it. So she's, to preserve her professional credibility and keep her seat on the team, she said, I can't say. These are the defenders of Western civilization today. They can't say. So I wanted to share with you a thought experiment. I learned this from Warren Buffett, but actually it comes from a now deceased philosopher by the name of John Rawls, and it's called the original position. So there's your little spirit floating around in the sublunary sphere above the earth somewhere between incarnations. And you're up there and you're looking for the appropriate place, something that resonates with who you are and what you want, to come back into this ball of mud and give it another round. And while you're in that position, Rawls and Warren Buffett say, so how do you choose where you would want to be? Is Western civilization Norway or Haiti? He said, now here are the terms. The original position is that you are behind a veil of ignorance, which very well may be true for all any of us really know. And the veil of ignorance is that you don't know when you decide where to go, whether you will be born rich or poor, to a prosperous family or a poor one. You don't know if you'll be born into an educated environment of educated people or not. You don't know if you're going to be male or female. You don't know if you're going to be born into a family of Christians, Jews, Muslims, or none of the above. You don't know if you're going to be gay or straight. You don't know any of those things.
What about race?
You don't know. You don't know. Now, Norway or Haiti? Oh, even if the worst malady you're going to suffer in life is a bad toothache, you'd probably choose Norway, where they have modern dentistry. But think about this. Port-au-Prince is one of the largest, it's the largest city in Haiti. It's the largest city in the world, is, I believe, that's certainly in our hemisphere, without central sewage. And so you have 3 million people that shower, that wash, use the toilet and stuff, and it just goes. It doesn't go into some Western civilization big building that begins to process the sewage. It just goes, and it goes into the ground, it goes into sinkholes, it goes into sewers, it goes into ditches, it just goes. 3 million people like that. So, you know, the whole country is a dumping ground. Now, I'm not going to tell you it's a shithole, but it's a dumping ground, right? And it contaminates the drinking water. Disease spreads. The rains, which rains a lot, flood these canals and flood these sinkholes, and they overflow into the neighborhoods and so forth. So Norway or Haiti? Oh, I can't say. I'm fine with fecal matter floating in my front door. I can't say. Norway has a per capita income that's 38.5 times that of Haiti. Norway or Haiti. Haiti has the lowest life expectancy in the Western Hemisphere. It's like, and I was surprised at this, but it's actually up 64 years now. Norway is 18 years longer. Do another 18 years of life matter to you? So, Norway or Haiti? Oh, I can't say. So our culture, our prominent people in our culture, in the mainstream media, the national debate, people aren't supposed to know the difference between fecal matter and ice cream. Now, in a more genteel era, Oliver Wendell Holmes went through something like this, and he said, well, I'll tell you, science is science. I'm here to tell you about science. I'm Oliver Wendell Holmes, science. The universe doesn't know the difference between dishwater and champagne. Well, the hell with you, I'm part of the universe. If nobody else wants to be the healthy human consciousness of this universe, I will be, and I think you would like to be, and we do know the difference, and we can discern. But we're entering an age in which there is no healthy human consciousness, and people are either afraid to say or they are indifferent to the achievement of hard-won, hard-fought achievements of the human race and Western civilization. So you don't know where you're going to be born? How about, the Middle East? Saudi Arabia didn't outlaw slavery until the 1960s. And yes, I'm not sure that it's outlawed there today. And I'll tell you something else. When we went in to rescue the royal family, the royal household of Kuwait, the rich plutocrats of Kuwait went to Switzerland to disco at night and ski, while American soldiers went in to reclaim their country. And what did we find when we got there? Sex slaves. Do you remember all those Filipino women that came running out crying and stuff, begging to be rescued because they'd been boarded up in private estates in Kuwait of the royal family? Oh, that's great. We're out there. Now we're making the world safe for slavery, and we are. You take Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton's needless regime change war in Libya has made Libya now safe for slavery, and they have slave markets in Libya. Oh, that's just great progress. In homosexuality is a death offense in 7 countries in that region.
Say that again?
Homosexuality, a death offense. You can be imprisoned in something like 10 countries for it, but it's a death offense in 7. So where would you want to be born? Does it take so much moral courage to say that Western civilization has rare gifts, but they are not being defended? We're exhausted. We're fatigued. And that makes a cultural transformation not only inevitable, but necessary. I have carried this clipping around. I'm not sure it fits in with where I am in speaking to you, but I've carried this clipping around for 22 years. I've always wanted to use it. And so this is the best opportunity I've ever heard, since we're talking about things like coronavirus and, the accomplishments of Western civilization and a little bit about Western medicine and its accomplishments. This is from Christina Hoff Sommers in 1998. She wrote this for Imprimis. She wrote, in the late 1960s, a group of hippies living in Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco decided that hygiene was a middle-class hang-up and that they'd be better off without it. So they decided to try it. So baths and showers, they weren't actually banned, but they were frowned upon. Tom Wolfe, the Right Stuff author and so on, he was intrigued by these hippies who he said they sought nothing less than to sweep aside all the codes and restraints of the past and start out from zero. Just like letting Western civilization die and trying to rebuild from nothing. And so here's what Sommers wrote about it. Before long, the hippies' aversion to modern hygiene had consequences that were as unpleasant as they were unforeseen. Tom Wolfe described them this way. At the Haight-Ashbury Clinic, there were doctors who were treating diseases that no living doctor had ever encountered before. Diseases that had disappeared so long ago that they had never even picked up modern medical Latin names. Things like the mange, the grunge, the itch, the twitch, the thrush, the scroff, the rot. Well, the itching and manginess eventually began to vex the hippies, leading them that they needed to seek help from the free clinics, and step by step, they had to rediscover for themselves the rudiments of modern hygiene, and they did that in less than a generation. But if Western civilization comes to a collapse, as I suspect it is, it will take more than a generation to restore it. Now, how am I doing on time? I'm okay. I want to give you some examples in my area of specialty, and what my next book is about the economy and the monetary system and so on. I want to give you some ideas about the pedestal upon which we put economic and financial reckoning and honesty in this country. We don't. Now, you do in your normal life if you balance your checkbook. As a collective, as a government, we don't value those things anymore. So when Obama was running for re-election, he went on, this 2012, he went on David Letterman's show, and David Letterman's a supporter of Obama, and he made no bones about it. And so Obama's sitting there in the chair, and Letterman said in his innocent way, he said, so tell me, how big is the U.S. national debt? It's like a split second of panic on Obama's face. Now, I don't care if he doesn't know, what the budget of the Department of Commerce is, some of these details. You can't know everything, even though you can pretend some of these guys. But so he's a little panicked, and then he said, well, I don't know precisely what the national debt was at the time. So Letterman didn't know that, he was going to make his friend look bad. So he said, well, is it $10 trillion? And Obama did the punt. He said, well, look, without answering the question about 10 trillion, he said, well, look, he did this deflection. He said, the thing you have to remember about the national debt is we owe it to ourselves. Now, this is what they teach at Columbia. This is what they teach at Harvard Law School. This is what community organizers learn. Even though it's not actually true, we are dependent on the kindness of foreign strangers here in this country. Almost a third of our national debt, close to $7 trillion, is owed to foreigners. Just China and Japan, we owe $2.3 trillion. That's a lot of money. That's 10% of the national debt. So Obama's saying, well, we owe it to ourselves is the most foolish thing since Dick Cheney, who said, well, deficits don't matter. Reagan proved deficits don't matter. Anyway, the truth is, at the time, when Obama became president, the national debt was $10 trillion. 4 years later, it had grown by 60%, and it was $16 trillion. And as you know today, it's $23 trillion. I'll give you one more from Obama just because it encapsulates the problem I'm talking about. The president and the education secretary, Arnie Duncan, I think was his name, went on stage with a press release, an announcement. They had come up with a plan about student debt. And they were going to cap certain student debt provisions so that, to give some relief to certain students in certain predicaments with overarching student debt. And some stupid frigging reporter, I can't believe it happened. Some stupid reporter said, any questions, right? Said, yeah, how much is this going to cost? Oh, I don't know. Do you know, Arnie? Arnie didn't know. President, I don't know. How much is this going to cost? The Secretary of Education said, well, we're going to figure that out on the back end. When the bill comes in. So isn't that like Nancy Pelosi? How much is this bill going to cost, this health care bill? She said, well, we have to pass the bill to find out what's in it. So then we'll know how much, it's so stupid. And listen, and I feel safe saying this, you're not going to go, Charles, here's my response to your talk. I feel safe saying this because it's not Democrats. Let me give you one from a neocon warmonger Republican. And here's Marco Rubio. And a couple of years ago, because it figures in a lot of things that are going now, it's a couple of years ago, probably 4 years ago now, Marco Rubio penned an article, a column, and a piece in the Wall Street Journal that the United States should create a currency board for Ukraine. Now, I guarantee you he doesn't know what maybe he does now. He didn't know what a currency board is, but a currency board basically says that American taxpayers will use their money to buy Ukrainian debt and to buy Ukrainian currency and stuff to maintain its value. Well, wait a minute. Rubio said, don't the Ukrainian people deserve a stable currency? I don't have any idea, but if they do, they should provide themselves one. Rather than asking us to provide them with one. But here's the way this stuff works. Now, here's the way this stuff really works. I don't know who wrote that for him. Somebody wrote it for him, and since he's a neocon warmonger, he agreed to put it in the Wall Street Journal under his own name. What do they really want? They want the United States taxpayer to bail out Western banking institutions that have made loans to Ukraine that can't be paid back.
Just like World War I.
Like all the wars. Like all the time. So that's what's basically going on behind this. But now here's the real shame, and I'm telling you this is symptomatic of what I've been talking to you about that's going on in Western civilization. There is not a word in that whole piece of 1,600 words or whatever it is, telling us how much his proposal for a Ukrainian currency board would cost us. Oh, that's funny. It's the Wall Street Journal, the financial newspaper of America. Look, what would you think if your sports newspaper or your sports page wrote that Kansas City won the Super Bowl, but they didn't tell you the score? There's no self-respecting editor in that position that would let something like that go by unless they didn't want it seen. So I know now I'm going to tell you about Trump. Trump got in a lot of trouble even from his supporters during the campaign period when he said, well, if anything goes wrong in America, with the national debt in America, we'll renegotiate the debt. And people are going, well, wait a minute. You're going to renegotiate the debt so you can pay off people who own debt at lower interest rates with new money that you have to borrow at higher interest rates. Because when America says, our bonds are no good anymore, we're going to negotiate them, you're a willing victim. This isn't like a real estate deal in New York. It's not like defaulting on a mortgage. I can't pay the mortgage, but I can go bankrupt, you won't get anything, or I'll give you 15%. This is the United States government saying, we can't honor our bonds, you're going to have to take a discount. Then when the Treasury goes to the market tomorrow to sell new bonds to pay off those discounted bonds that we're buying, they're at much, much higher interest rates, and they exacerbate the problem of an unfundable, unpayable national debt. Well, they were coming at him left and right and up and down about this, and he tried to do it, but clearly he was thinking from the point of view of a real estate developer and speculator and stuff, and he had the wrong model. So finally, and he tried to call off the dogs and he couldn't. So finally he said, they were just like besieging him. He said, well, the truth is that we just print the money anyway. That's like a little kid saying the emperor has no clothes. And so they all shut up and they all went away and left him alone because he was letting the cat out of the bag that, but even more recently, with one of his budgets, I don't remember, it was the last one or the one before, his advisors put together a big presentation for him to show him the hockey stick growth of the U.S. national debt. And I mean, it's called a hockey stick because it goes like this, it turns up and then it goes, shoom! And he goes unimpressed, he goes, yeah, but I won't be here then. Which, of course, it's always all about him anyway, so. But this is an age of not just financial indifference, but of total indifference, an age of maximum governmental irresponsibility. In Bhopal, India, they had that terrible accident back in, was it 87 or whenever it was, the Union Carbide accident. 3,000 people died. in that accident. Just like 9/11, 3,000 people died in the thing. So what do they do in India? The CEO of Union Carbide was arrested. 8 employees were convicted of death by negligence, and the company was fined about $500 million. What happened in the United States was nobody. We spend all of this money, countless hundreds of billions on defense and intelligence and stuff. Was there not even a scintilla of a little whiff, of a little hint, of just a smidge of accountability for anybody in that process? Not a bit. And more accountability in Bhopal, India. So the National Security Advisor to the President is promoted to Secretary of State. The head of the CIA is given the Presidential Medal of Freedom. The President is reelected. You don't even have to talk about conspiracies to begin to understand how boldly they have lied to us about these things. And I won't. You know what is funny though? It's that when you or I talk about a conspiracy, we know today that the CIA lied its ass off to the Warren Commission. I mean, we know that they were following Oswald with really closely for years before the event of November 22nd. We know that now. You know, if you live long enough, the truth starts to come out. Napoleon said, well, you don't have to suppress the truth. You don't have to destroy the truth. You just have to keep it hidden long enough that it doesn't matter any longer, right? So, one of the things we have, one of my favorite example of this is the talking point. No one could have foreseen airplanes being used as weapons. Even though, they had the Atlanta Olympics and they had fighters up there to keep airplanes from being used as weapons. And at the the Democratic National Convention, they had airplanes flying overhead just in case anybody wanted to do anything from the skies or use airplanes as weapons. This went on over and over and over again.
Hey, Joe, Tom Clancy had just written a book about terrorists.
Of course. And only weeks before 9/11, they had the G8 summit in Genoa, Italy. And this was unprecedented. President Bush went there, and Condoleezza Rice went there to the G8 summit, and they took the unprecedented measure of not staying at the G8 summit grounds, at the villa or compound or resort or whatever it was. They overnighted on a U.S. aircraft carrier with planes overhead. This is like 8 weeks before 9/11. But nobody could have foreseen airplanes being used as weapons. And the Bush actually said later, he said, I had to go to the G8 summit and, I asked for that special briefing about Al-Qaeda and stuff before that because we were under threat from Al-Qaeda and I had to stay on. I mean, he admitted it, later. But, nobody knows this stuff. Nobody really cares. Anyway, one of the contributions that I care about a lot, and you should too, is the contribution that Western civilization has made to discrediting command economies. Nazis and socialists and communists and stuff like that. And the best single job was perhaps the work of Ludwig von Mises in 1922. Socialism was like the phenomenon, it's a bigger phenomenon than it is today. And it's pretty scary today. And back at this time, it was all the rage in intellectual circles, right, where you would expect it, right? The people that know the least about how the world actually works. But it was all the rage. And then Mises came out with a book in 1922, debunking socialism, showed that it's not viable. He demonstrated that the lack of prices in socialism remove essential feedback from the deployment of resources, and that socialist economies can't calculate. No wonder the socialists in our country don't know the difference between fecal matter and ice cream. They can't calculate. You know, and in the absence of prices, you know what they found in the Soviet Union when it collapsed? American economists went into the Kremlin and they found things like Sears Roebuck catalogs. Because the economic central planners of the Soviet Union had no prices to guide them about whether, you know, this scarce material should go to this need or this end or that end. And so they used the Sears catalog as a proxy for prices so they could kind of figure out the allocation of goods. They didn't have a natural organic system that did it. And Mises had discovered that. And you know, by the way, the serious socialists, the intellectually honest socialists, reeled at this discrediting of, and they, what are we going to do? This is, there must be an answer to this, and they strove mightily to figure out a way to say, well, you know, this is a problem, but we can figure this out, and we can impute prices, and we could do this, and it was all nonsense. But at least there were a couple of honest ones that realized the mortal blow that they had been dealt. And then Hayek came along and was very clear about the nature of prices in the economy, that they communicate information. And they communicate information so where you don't even need to know if there's a flood in a mine in South America when you buy raw materials from there. And you don't need to know if labor's on strike in Uzbekistan, and you don't need to know all the details. You look at the price of the goods that you need, and you make decisions. Well, this is getting pretty high. We need to find a substitute or an alternative, you know, so that there is a prioritization of the use of resources in our world, instead of like the Soviet Union, where you go in, you find all of, you know, the factory chief that had the most clout got the steel that he requisitioned. But it just sat there going unused while other places were crying for it. But we have a price mechanism so that people that have to have it can get it, and people that can find alternatives have to develop alternatives. So it communicates information. Hayek says that this is another wonder. He said if we had just invented it, the price system, people would think this is the most marvelous invention of all time. They would think that it's as marvelous as language, and language is a close it bears a close relationship to the price system because it is the product of human intelligence, but it's not the product of human planning. It evolves spontaneously, as do prices. Well, I feel like I ought to tell you a little bit about my new book, and that's the reason I suspect that I'm here today. And
Charles, you gonna take questions at the end?
yes. So if you had known in 1976, gold was about $100 an ounce, silver was $4 an ounce. If you had known then that Jimmy Carter was about to be elected president, and that he would spike the national debt by 43% almost immediately, and a few years into his presidency we'd have double-digit inflation rates. If you had known that in 1976, you might have invested in gold back then, and it would have been a very good thing. If you had known that the Federal Reserve was so screwed up that they were going to change interest rates 23 times in 1 year. In 1978, they changed interest rates 23 times. They didn't know whether they were, you know, what or go blind, right? If you had foreseen the events that took place late in the Carter administration, if you had seen that in 1979 a group of Iranian students would take the embassy there and 63 Americans hostage, if you knew that Iran's foreign accounts would be frozen by the United States, if you knew that that would be followed in weeks by the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, if you knew that the Soviets were on the march around the world, including in the Western Hemisphere, and they were providing armaments and the machinery of warfare and so on to the Sandinistas, and if you had known that there was a new civil war in El Salvador nearby, if you had known all that in the fall of '70, and if you'd also known at the same time that a handful of gunmen had taken over the Holy Mosque in Mecca, you might have thought to buy gold. So, and you would have done very well if you had done so. From $100 in 1976, gold ran up 4 years later to $850. Silver was even better, from $4 to $50. If you had known that the debt was exploding during the Bush years, if you'd known about quantitative easing and the activities of the Federal Reserve, if you had known all of that stuff in, say, 2008, you might have bought gold then, and you would have seen gold rocket to $1,900 and silver back up to $50. Well, I have a new book that makes the case that all of that malfeasance is dwarfed by what is going on today. We are at a crossroads of history. And it's always at the crossroads of history where everything seems to happen at once. And so my new book is called The Last Bull Market Ever. I have 2 publishers. I'll probably know on Monday which one will be selected. And so I can't tell you exactly what's going to come out, but it's virtually written, needs to be updated a little bit, so it'll be out fairly soon after that. The Last Bull Market Ever, and it gives seven reasons why this new gold bull market will be the last one in terms of the U.S. dollar. And it's called the last gold rush ever. I'm sorry. It's not a gold rush, though, like the California gold rush, or somebody discovers a new way to reclaim gold from the sea or mine the asteroids or something. This is when people start standing outside the gold dealer and wrapping around the corner to buy gold. It's a real gold rush, but it has to do with protecting themselves from the government's malfeasance and the failure of the government's monetary system. So I set the stage of the 7 reasons for the last gold rush ever. I set the stage with 2 background pieces. The first one is the Federal Reserve. And, we're in an age now in which everybody knows about the deep state. Well, a lot of us, we've probably all known about the deep state for a long time by different names, right? There was the permanent government, the invisible government, the insiders, the establishment, the deep state. Now it's out in the open. They were hiding in plain sight all those years. Now everybody's talking about, well, the deep state this, the deep state that. Well, the first chapter is about their money manipulators, because that is exactly what the Fed is, the money manipulators of the deep state. And they have enabled wars that the American people wouldn't pay for if they had a choice. They've done it surreptitiously. In fact, actually, the Fed was created just in time to get America to enter World War I. So Americans didn't want to be there, and if you had asked them to pay overtly through their taxes for that war, they would have dug in their heels, and they wouldn't have done it because they didn't want to be there to begin with. They could no more figure out what that war was about then than we can figure it out today. So instead, the Federal Reserve stepped in, and over the course of the war, provided funding to our partners and to the government, to the war effort, by inflating the currency. And over the course of World War I, prices for the American consumer doubled. Oh, how did that happen? Well, because they exploded the money supply. So the American people paid for it, but they didn't know. They just thought, oh, those damn prices keep rising, without understanding that, behind the curtain there is the man with the printing press from the government. So I think the salient thing out of several things I say in that chapter, the salient thing to know is that we've entered a new quantitative easing. And quantitative easing is just a euphemism for money printing, liquidity operations, and so on, all the things that the Fed actually does. And just the briefest description of what they did back then, the Fed's balance sheet, the assets that the Fed says to own, was running about $800 billion, and had been running right along about $800 billion forever. And then they decided to buy a whole bunch of trash mortgage securities from the banks, bail the banks out at the expense of the American people. So they started creating digital money like crazy, and they bailed out the banks. They didn't bail out the American people, millions of whom lost their homes, but they bailed out the banks, and the Fed's assets grew to almost $4.5 trillion. They're running around $800 billion. It exploded, hockey stick, to almost $4.5 trillion. Now, the secret of that is that the Fed can print all the money at once, and it doesn't affect anything if they shrink wrap it and leave it in the basement of the Mariner Eccles building. Doesn't do any harm. Doesn't make prices go up until it enters the consumer economy. So all of that quantitative easing, for the most part, was segregated. It was kept on ice. It was like a nuclear reactor. Everything's contained, and it started to leak out. And when some of it started to leak out with new bank lending that multiplies money creation many times over in a fractional reserve system, details we don't need. It's in the book, but. The Fed got a little worried. They'd created these trillions of dollars, and they figured, now we better unwind them before they ruin the American economy. We better do something about it. So they started in 1978 to try to roll back some of that quantitative easing. And Wall Street threw a fit, because Wall Street is driven by free money, by government money printing, by liquidity, because it's all stovepiped to the canyons of New York. So they threw a fit, and I think it was probably a couple of weeks, maybe 3 weeks, the stock market fell by 25%. And Jerome Powell and the Fed, they panicked. They said, well, we're not going to try to unwind this money printing. No way, we're going to stop that now. We're going to have quantitative tightening, but we're calling a halt to that. And then the stock market, with the Christmas boom, the stock market took off and continued to climb through 2019. Now, rather than unwind what has already been done and is overhanging the economy from the 2008 incident, they've engaged in a new round of quantitative easing. And it's bigger and better than the one that went before. And they don't call it quantitative easing, so we call it not quantitative easing. But of course, it's quantitative easing and it's money printing. And you see it in the repo markets, the overnight markets that are being flooded with money by the Federal Reserve because they're afraid that a flare-up of higher interest rates will spread, and the American debt just can't be serviced. At these rates it can't be serviced. But if normalizing interest rates 5 or 6% or something on the Fed's portfolio, it's game over. I mean, it can't even be prolonged with smoke and mirrors. So they're desperate to keep higher interest rates popping out. They've engaged in this repo business, but it's quantitative easing too. The other thing I want to talk about is the background to these 7 things. Thing number 2 that guarantees the last gold rush ever is the debt. And you know a great deal about the debt. It's incomprehensible that we have record high debt, highest debt in the world, and the lowest interest rates in history. How does that happen? How do you have the most debt ever and the lowest interest rates ever? And that too is like stretching a rubber band that can't go on. But the key thing to remember about this is a principle that economists who do talk about it, and not very many do, the government ones don't, the Federal Reserve ones don't, the academic ones don't, but there are still a few that talk about it. It's the marginal productivity of debt. Now, you have a business, you go out and borrow $100,000 because you think you can grow your business. And you find after growing your business and having that $100,000 loan that you've increased your business by $90,000. You got a problem. If you borrow $100,000 and you make $150,000, things are starting to work in your favor. But if the marginal productivity of debt is less than 1, in other words, each dollar borrowed produces less than the dollar of results, it's terminal. It's game over, and that's where we are now. And I'll provide charts in the new book, but you can find them yourself on the Fed's webpage. That the debt is outpacing GDP, is outpacing American productivity. And it's even worse than that because American productivity doesn't even belong to the government. It's this is what you pay your mortgage with, you feed your family, you meet your daily needs. So even if it were all theirs, it's not enough to keep up with the growth rate of American debt. Then there are the coming events. So the background of the Federal Reserve and the deep state money manipulators, the background of the debt, the coming events are five other things that act they act as accelerants for this last bull market ever. And they are things like the trade and currency wars. Currency war basically comes to an end game when all the countries of the world race each other to the bottom, trying to destroy the value of their currency. Now, most rational people want to get as much as possible from the dollars they spend. Your government wants you to get as little as possible from your dollars. And it's not just American Keynesian economists and people at the Fed and Treasury officials. This goes on all over the world. I read an interview with one of the head central bankers of the Bank of China, People's Bank of China, not long ago. And it was like, these are the same guys there that are in our Treasury Department saying the same Keynesian nightmare things about ruining our currencies. But the new enthusiasm in this area is modern monetary theory. And modern monetary theory is just pedal to the metal money printing. It's not particularly modern. It's certainly monetary, but it's not a real theory. It's just doing what they want to do. They want to spend money that they don't have on things that will get them reelected. So they create this theory called modern monetary theory that says, well, as long as you pay your taxes and government money, the government can print as much as it wants forever, and we're going to do so. And so Bernie's on board, and AOC's on board, and the left wing of the Democratic Party's on board, and the idea is spreading now in Washington. It's spreading like the coronavirus in Washington, and it's modern monetary theory. There is a war on cash, which is chapter 4. The war on cash is increasing. Why? Besides that they like to control you, besides that they want to know everything that you're doing, why is the war on cash now such a priority in the deep state? Well, a couple of reasons. One is they are intent on creating a regime of negative interest rates. Now, this is historically unprecedented, that you go to the bank and you put in $1,000, then when you take your money out, they give you $950. Instead of paying you an interest return on your money, they charge you for the privilege of holding your money. It's negative interest rates. And they are coming to the United States, and Alan Greenspan knows it, and the Federal Reserve people know it, everybody knows it, that we're going to have negative interest rates in the financial system here in the United States. Well, who's going to put up with that? Who's going to put $1,000 in the bank today so you can get back $950 in a year? Nobody in their right mind. So they have to institutionalize the money so that they can keep their hands on it. They have to have a war on cash so that your money has to be in the institution. You won't have cash. They hate cash. Not only does it provide you anonymity and privacy, look, this is the age of home invasions and carjackings and, stealing people's digital information and stuff. It only makes sense for people to want to have financial privacy. The government hates that. They don't want you to have it, and financial privacy goes along with cash. So they've got to get rid of the cash, but they also have to get rid of the cash so they can have a negative interest rate regime. And they have done this already. They're doing this stuff in other countries. They had a midnight cash raid in Cyprus a couple of years ago. So that they decided in the middle of the night that everybody with a deposit of over 100,000 drachmas or whatever the unit was in Cyprus would have to pay a fine before they could take you have to pay a fine to keep your money in the bank. So that when you went to withdraw your money, they took 30% of it or however much they needed to keep the banking system afloat. So you had the equivalent of $100,000. You'd go in the morning to withdraw your money, they give you 70. Say, that's it. This stuff is going on. The other day, in January, we had a run on the gold markets in Germany. Another thing Americans aren't aware, I'll come back to Germany in a minute. Gold broke out last year. The new bull market started in the summer of last year. Gold has hit all-time highs in most of the major currencies of the world. All-time high in the British pound, the euro, all-time high in the Japanese yen, all-time high in India, a dozen other countries. In fact, it's at all-time highs in every currency. Canada, the Australian dollar, all-time highs. The only currencies it's not at all-time highs in yet is the U.S. dollar and the Swiss franc. So the gold market, the bull market has already started. In Germany, back in January, they tightened down on the war on cash, and they said they lowered the limit. If you're going to buy gold, we must have your name, rank, and serial number. The dealer must take it and report it, collect your information, even if you're only going to buy $1,500 worth of gold, like roughly an ounce. You know, we have reporting requirements here in the United States too, and they're onerous, they're difficult, and it's criminal for you to evade them, and it's criminal for the gold dealer to help you evade them. They have to report, even if you have done nothing wrong. If they think the banks can report you, must file a suspicious persons report if you're behaving in a way unlike all of your fellow citizens. You know, so anyway, war on cash. The next thing is the New World Order. And there is a New World Order in development, and it doesn't include the role that the United States has played since the end of World War II. And the best evidence of this is de-dollarization, because since the end of World War II, the dollar has been the reserve currency of the world. Foreign central banks, like they once held gold and issued their currency against their gold reserves, they now hold dollars. And they issue their currency against their dollar reserves. And, you know, foreign commerce, probably 70% of foreign commerce is conducted in terms of dollars. So if, you know, if England buys gold from OPEC or from Saudi Arabia, they do it in terms of US dollars. It's priced in dollars. This goes on all over the world. Well, the central banks of the world see what's going on with the dollar. They're brighter than we are. They know more about what's going on with the dollar than we do. They have a vested interest in it, and they are bailing on it. And they are moving their reserves out of US dollars and into gold. I don't know if you know that Russia used to be a major creditor of the United States. And Russia held reserves of about $100 billion US dollars in their reserves. They got rid of them over the last year or two. Now every now and then it pops up to about 10 billion that they need for current expediencies and stuff. They're done. And they've been adding gold by the hundreds of tons, and so has China. And it's one thing if you think there are enemies, if countries that are opposed to us start doing that, abandoning the dollar, but otherwise so-called friendly countries are doing the same thing. You know, Hungary and Poland and other countries. Germany, as you probably know, has called back the gold that it kept in reserves, kept stored with the Federal Reserve in New York and stuff. They repatriated their gold. This is a symptom of the ending of the old world order that was based on dollar hegemony around the world. The other thing is the next accelerant of the last gold rush ever is banana republic economics. And I don't know how many experiments the world needs in socialism, you know, before they realize it doesn't work. You look at the map of Korea, the satellite map of Korea at night, you know, and there's the South, you know, highly illuminated. You know, Seoul's just bright as it can be, but it's all along the coastline. The country's highly illuminated, and then there's a line of demarcation. It doesn't show up. You know, the border is not a natural geological feature. But there's a line of demarcation where suddenly everything's dark from there on up, and that's North Korea. And it's the difference in the experiment in the South with relatively free markets and the socialism of the North. And, you know, didn't we learn that between East Germany and West Germany? Or didn't we learn that with the collapse of the Soviet Union and, you know, and a score of other communist states? And haven't we learned about the failure of banana republic economics in, like, Venezuela and so on? But they are on the move here. And of course, it's all designed for new crony companies. I mean, you know, back in the old days in the United States, 100 years ago, the crony companies that had influence were the fruit companies. Believe it or not, you know, fruit companies. And, you know, John Dulles was the Secretary of State, but he'd been the attorney he'd been on the board of, you know, Dole, not know, it was Dole or Libby or Dole or one of those companies, you know, and so now he's Secretary of State. His brother Alan Dulles is the head of the CIA. And whenever, you know, some little banana republic country, you know, starts, you know, resisting the plunder of their country or the stealing or nationalization or the nationalization by American fruit companies of their land, the Dulleses would foment a revolution to replace the recalcitrants.
They would fell into what?
They would foment a revolution in Central American countries, in these banana republics. Well, we do it today. Today it's not fruit companies that are the favored cronies. You know, today's companies are there, you know, it's mainly finance, you know, it's banking. You know, we foment revolutions for reasons of banking and energy and so on and so forth. I think the most important chapter of my book is the final one about the end of the empire. I'm talking about the military, the U.S. military empire. And I had to pick one example, one example of something where, the U.S. military empire has been counterproductive and hasn't been necessary, and most people don't understand. So I tried to figure, what's the hot spot today that is liable, that could lead to an outbreak of a global war? And well, I think it's Iran. I think Iran's very likely to happen, but I chose, for reasons of illustrating the commerce, the South China Sea. And, the seas there are getting crowded. There's a tangled spaghetti plate of claims and counterclaims that involve, Japan and China and the Philippines and other countries, to the waterways and so on there. But it's not thinkable that billions of Chinese can have been moved into the middle class since Deng Xiaoping without a huge increase in trade. And so the waterways have become more and more filled with Chinese shipping. So the United States says it's not the South China Sea, it's the American lake in South China. And we're going to keep the sea lanes open there. Well, who in the hell wants to close the sea lanes? The Chinese don't want, the Chinese leadership goes to sleep at night afraid that they're not going to be able to provide jobs for all those people that have been urbanized, and there'll be some kind of a rebellion. And now you look at just how much rebellion is in the air with the coronavirus. There's a lot of rebellion in the air, and if the economy collapses, it's all over for the leadership. So they're desperate to keep the game going and for goods to flow, the stuff they ship out through the South China Sea and the resources that they ship in, the oil that they bring in from the Middle East that goes through the South China Sea. This is all absolutely necessary to them. They have no intention whatsoever of closing the South China Sea, so why is it our problem? So we figured out, actually Chalmers Johnson figured out that protecting the oil production in the Middle East for Americans spent $5 of military expenditures to protect Middle Eastern oil production for the United States. $5 for every $1.10 worth of oil that we actually bought. So in other words, the $1.10 that we spent on oil actually cost us $6.10, because we didn't tell Saudi Arabia, and we didn't tell the Middle Eastern plutocrats and oligarchs that they needed to protect their own ports and clean up their own ports, and they know the area better and the people better. They ought to do something about it, or we're not going to buy stuff from them. They didn't tell them that. They said, okay, we'll go in there and we'll plunder the American people. And so they think they're buying $1.10 worth of petroleum from the Middle East, but they're actually paying $6.10, and that has been the case. But the last chapter, when I talk about this, I give just one example of the South China Seas and keeping the sea lanes open. And I try to determine what the cost of keeping those sea lanes open militarily is versus the cost to the economy if the sea lanes are closed. And we have been through that before, and I have models to choose from, because you remember that there was the Arab oil embargo in 1972, and oil's fungible. Once they sell it to somebody, they don't know where it goes and stuff. But we had circuitous routes of oil shipment to the United States that cost us more, just as if the sea lanes had been closed. They weren't actually closed, but we were paying more to ship the oil here because it's a fungible commodity, and Stockholm could buy it, or South America could buy it, and then they'd mark it up and ship it to the United States, and we'd get the oil, and so on. And so there was no problem. And during the middle of the Arab oil embargo, we were importing more oil than we had before it began. Some problem. But even better than that was the closing of the Suez Canal. And you can't imagine how much trade went through the Suez Canal before it was closed in 1967. And now all this commerce, especially for Europe, had to flow around South Africa to come from the Middle East. And it couldn't go through the canal, and all kinds of commerce from Asia and stuff had to take a long circuitous route. And so there's a fellow, actually an Australian academic, who figured out, well, what was the cost to America's GDP and the cost to the European GDP of that delay? Because it slowed things down, we paid more for it, we had to find alternative routes and ports and stuff like that. And it turns out that the cost to the GDP was a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of the cost of warfare. And you may remember that Henry Kissinger planned to go marching into Saudi Arabia back during the Nixon administration and start a war there during the Arab oil embargo. But the cost of war, not to mention human lives, and why should we mention human lives? After all, Kissinger said, well, you know, military men are poor, dumb sheep that we just use them for our purposes. You know, us intelligent people, we use them, you know, they're like,
We call them beasts.
they're expendables. They're the expendables. Us smart people aren't expendable, but they are. So don't count human lives then if you don't want. Don't count human suffering, but just in terms of pure dollars, you know, the United States wants the governments of Europe and NATO countries to spend 2% of their GDP on warfare. But the cost to their economy of shipping all that stuff around, both during the Arab oil embargo and during the closing of the Suez Canal, was a tiny fraction. And of course, when the war starts, the 2% that they're supposed to spend goes way, way up, right? And you don't know, you know, like Mike Tyson said, you know, everybody has a plan until you get punched in the nose. You don't know how the war is going to end. You don't know how long it's going to last. We were told that Iraq was going to be 6 weeks, maybe 6 days. I doubt 6 months. You know, you don't know. But anyway, the cost of warfare far exceeds the cost to the GDP of circuitous routes of shipping, and yet there we are to keep the sea lanes open. So anyway, we have no respect for financial accounting. Our leadership has no respect for the American people. Nobody has the courage to defend Western civilization. Well, it's what they told us during the Cold War. These are two great but competing economic systems of equal value. You know, it was all nonsense. And you know, guys would write, Paul Samuelson, the world's most popular economics textbook, oh yeah, well the Soviets' Marxist model can compete and outproduce the United States even. It's a viable economic system, which was all balderdash. It was all balderdash. And the CIA could inflate the military might, its estimates of the military might of the Soviet Union, so that we would divert more of our money to the military-industrial complex. And they did so. By the way, did anybody, you know, after, I suspect a lot of you are Trump supporters, did anybody see Tucker Carlson caught it? Oh, I'm so grateful to him. Just a couple of weeks ago, he said, wait a minute. We have been through this Russia thing. We've been through all of this stuff for all of this time, and Americans are waking up to the deep state and what it will do and the lies that it tells, and you know, the assertion over our freedoms that it intends to take, and that it's unchecked. And we've learned about the deep state, and suddenly the deep state says, you know, we got to kill General Soleimani because he's going to attack the United States, and he has a number of targets that we can't tell you that he's really ready to launch on and stuff. And the American people, yeah, all the people, all the Trump supporters even, that had spent 3 years learning about the lies of the deep state, oh yeah, the deep state says so. And Tucker goes, what the hell's wrong with you people? You know who they are now. You know what they do. You know the lies they tell. And then this comes and goes, oh yeah, well we got to do that then. We must do that. I think in this transformation, the lessons that we should bear in mind, maybe we can use, are lessons once again from the founders of this country. They threw off royalty, the prior form of government before the nation state form. They threw off the king. They divided power against itself. They understood a lot of this stuff. It was so revolutionary. What they did was so revolutionary and never been done. Changing the nature of the individual to the state had never been done. And there are remnants of the old thinking. I used to hate it on talk radio when somebody would call up and say, well, you know, Charles, the First Amendment gives me the right of free speech. You know, no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. It tells the government to stay the hell out of it. They don't have any rights to give you. Those rights are yours from by virtue of being a human being and a thinking, conscious agent on this planet. I saw it in the, just the other day, there's an editorial writer in the Republic, Elvira Diaz or something, and she started off her thing, you know, well, the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, First Amendment gives us the right to. And in my younger days, I would like, and want to do something about it, send her a quick note. You know, I don't do that anymore because it doesn't get you any results. But anyway, what they did was so utterly revolutionary, so unprecedented, that we should take our examples from them. But as revolutionary as what was, they threw out everything. Well, wait a minute. Unlike the hippies in Haight-Ashbury, they didn't throw out everything. They kept hygiene, right? No, they kept the inheritance of the common law. So as revolutionary, they started with the beginning of the nature of man and the state and inverted it from what it had always, but they kept the valuable inheritance of Western civilization. So they kept the principle of mens rea and actus reus. And this, to me, is the most important discovery, one of the most important discoveries in Western civilization and criminal law. And it says that if I pick up Terry's phone here and stick it in my pocket when I walk out the door thinking that it's my phone, I haven't committed a crime. Now, if I take his phone thinking it's his and I want to go sell it at the pawn shop or at the street corner, that's a crime. But it says there are two elements to a crime. There is mens rea, which is the mental component of the crime. And that's why in Western law and on Perry Mason and all those shows you see, you know, you willingly, with malice aforethought, knowingly, intentionally, and so on. You have to have a mental component. I intended to deprive him of his phone. And then you have to have the actual act. And the act itself is not a crime if you don't have the mental component. And the mental component, boy, I'd sure like to steal his phone, but if I don't act on it, I haven't committed a crime. This is a discovery of Western civilization, and it's on its way out. It's leaving us. This is won by the suffering of people that were imprisoned all over the Western civilization by kings and dukes and princes and stuff for many, many years, and it was finally won, and this principle has been incorporated into our law, and it's on its way out, as is the presumption of innocence, as is free speech. And if we can't preserve these things, then this new cultural shift that we're talking through, instead of being like what the Americans did us by preserving the inheritance that was valuable and then doing something revolutionary in addition, if we don't see that those things are preserved, then we will go the way of the French Revolution. And there's a reason that it was called the Reign of Terror. And there's a reason that people would go to watch heads lopped off on the guillotine and rivers of blood flow for afternoon entertainment in France. There's a reason, and it's because they didn't preserve the essential underlying freedom that the founders of this country did. And in fact, Robespierre, the terrorist associate, said, well, in France, we look at freedom a little different. Freedom is your willingness to obey the commands of the state. So there you go. We're at a crossroads of history, and a lot is in danger of being lost. It's inevitable that there will be a transformation of some sort, and it is my view that all of the institutions of modern life, the big institutions, education, the churches, the monetary system, the government, all these things are being discredited and they're beginning to crumble. And something new and wonderful can arise from that, but we have to be very, very careful to exert strenuous effort to make sure that the accomplishments of our history, like mens rea and actus rea and freedom of speech and so on, are preserved along the way. Thanks very much. Let's take some questions and see if I could fake an answer. Yeah, of course.
Thank you, Charles. About probably at least half an hour, 45 minutes ago, you mentioned the hockey stick trajectory of our nation's debt. Are you talking about after W came in and we had his wars of choice, or you're talking about now under Trump with the exploding deficit?
All you damn Democrats.
Yeah. Actually, I guess you could say I'm actually talking about both.
Okay.
Because it's begun to turn up steeply, and it
Yeah.
rises more and more steeply, and then all of a sudden it's exponential.
Okay, with that in mind,
Yes, sir.
my question is, Republicans like to talk about debt going crazy under Democrats. When Obama took over, the annual deficit was $1.4 trillion. When he left office, per year, 1.4 trillion a year. That's the deficit, not the debt, the deficit.
I know the difference.
When Obama left office, it was $0.4 trillion a year. That was the greatest percentage decrease in the federal deficit since the Eisenhower administration. The GOP almost always criticizes Obama for the debt and never mentions that the hockey stick trajectory under W was killed dead in its tracks effectively when Obama came in. Why is it that you guys never give Obama credit for that?
Well, I guess the answer is that you have to put it when Obama came into the presidency, the United States was in economic collapse. It was in economic freefall. And I don't defend Bush and the Republicans, believe you me, but federal spending exploded, and that's just what happens in a calamity. You know, we are a quasi-socialist state. What happens when there's a downturn or a recession? Here's what happens. Social spending goes up. It's already baked into the cake. It's what happens. It's provisions that are already in the law. Social spending climbs in a downturn. What happens to revenues? Revenues fall in a downturn. So of course the deficit exploded in the Bush years. And of course, as that began, you know, we are told that the recession ended in 2009. I didn't believe it myself at the time, but so those things started tightening down. So I don't know how you attribute that to, Obama's, fiscal adroitness. This is a natural organic process. And the next recession will see the same thing, regardless of whether the president is Trump or Bernie or Buttigieg or who it may be. Social spending, it's automatic, it's baked into the cake. Social spending will rise and revenues will fall, and that differential, the deficit, will increase.
Charles, but when you compare an 8-year period to a different 8-year period, I don't think that you can fall back on the argument that, there was a recession in there and that's what caused the difference in the debt pictures. I just don't think it's
Okay, didn't I already tell you in this talk this morning that when Obama became president?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
I'm sorry.
Listen up, folks, listen up. What's that, Charles?
When Obama took office, the national debt was $10 trillion. At the end of his first term, it was $16 trillion. It had grown by 60% in one term.
But it was coming, the deficit itself was coming down rapidly, like I said, faster than it had since Eisenhower.
Yeah. Well, when you have the Fed print $4.5 trillion of new money to drive interest rates lower, the cost of financing the debt collapses. And as I've already explained, social spending goes up and so on and so forth. All these things are extraneous. I don't see how you can credit it to the presence of Barack Obama.
I'm not saying that he was the guy that did it. I'm saying that during his 8 years versus W's 8 years, the deficit numbers are drastically different, and it had to have something to do with
You're
the mentality
laboring
of
mightily,
the
but you're bringing forth a mouse. The national debt of the national debt of the United States when Obama became president was $10 trillion. When he left office, it was $20 trillion. It doubled.
What was the debt when W took off?
It was like 5 or 6.
6.2.
6.2, yeah.
Oh, so it was.
Who cares? What are you saying? You're
What
saying
I'm saying
Obama
is-
good and Bush bad? You're talking to the wrong guy.
Man, I'm saying that the Republicans have this habit of blowing the freaking deficit up incredibly and then blaming the Democrats.
Well, I'm not sure.
I'm trying to listen to Charles.
Yeah, no, I know. But I'm not sure why you want me to play that game. I'm not sure.
Because it's honest.
No, it's not.
Oh, for God's sake.
Do you want to see what goes on in the basement of the Congress at night when you're not looking?
Yeah, I'd like to.
Huh? I don't think you want to see it.
Yeah, I would.
What you think is Republican spending and Democratic spending, believe me, it's Democratic Republican spending. Believe me.
Charles, can I add
Yes, sir.
something to that real quick? I've actually attributed the budget is the responsibility of the House of Representatives. So to blame or give credit to Obama or blame Obama, no, you give it to the Speaker of the House. Because he's the one who controls the debate and the discussion on the budget. All the President can do is propose. If he goes along with the Speaker of the House, great. You know, Obama had the Speaker of the House, the Republican Speaker of the House for 6 years. No, yeah, for 2 years, the first 2 years. So when you bring the President in versus the House of Representatives in, and everybody makes the same mistake, is that the President, no, the budget is the Speaker of the House. They're the only ones who can allocate money out. It's only the House of Representatives, and then it has to go through the Senate, and then they have to concur, and they can change it, and then it has to go back to the House, and that's the only way to do it. It's not the executive. Not the executive.
Let me take his comment too.
Sorry.
Give you a little background information. I've been trying to find a big picture of what has happened, and I'm documenting this in onfreedomroad.com. And my latest revelation is the Civil War was in fact the beginning of this problem you're talking about, because the deep state / communists changed it from Jeffersonian to this bullshit we have now. Is that pretty much correct?
I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. But look, I just spent an hour and a half up here or something trying to tell you that this, that we're in we should be moving into the post-political age. Forget these people. They've destroyed the institutions that they're there to manage. It's not going to be fixed. It's not going to be fixed by a Republican. It's not going to be fixed by Trump. It's not going to be fixed by the Democratic president. It's not going to be fixed by Congress. There used to be, I know this will tax your memories, there used to be a coalition in Congress of fiscal conservatives who wanted to do something about the deficits and the debts. They're gone. They're gone. They're 1-2 guys. They're gone. There is no coalition for fiscal responsibility in Washington. Gone. Crickets. So I'm trying to tell you, if you want to worry this thing like, to justify your partisan affiliations or something, or, them good, them bad, you're talking to the wrong person. I'm trying to tell you, we need to move. I think you're all better off if you assume from today forward that all of these institutions are failures.
Yes.
And do not look to any of them for salvation. They are all failures. And you can't change, this leader of the failing institution with that leader and reclaim it. It's far, far too late. That's just my point of view. Yes, sir.
On any topic, what is a recent nonfiction book that you recommend?
A recent nonfiction book?
Charles Goyette.
Yeah. Actually, it's a couple of years old now, but I thought it was excellent. It was a book by can't remember his name. You can look it up on your phone real quick. It's called The Devil's Chessboard. And it's a story about Allen Dulles and the CIA. It begins to get into the Kennedy thing a little bit. Dulles was the head of the CIA until Kennedy fired him. And then he insinuated himself into being the de facto head of the Warren Commission. Funny about that. But it is a great, great book that pulls the cover back on, a lot of stuff, The Devil's Chessboard. And the author's a great author too, and I should know him, but I've read his stuff for years, but I can't remember. Hey, Ernie?
Last night, coming back, the guy sitting next to me on the airplane was commodities or financial guy or something for Chicago. He left Chicago and moved us home a few years ago to here in the Valley. And he commutes back and forth. And we got the yakking and so on. And, God forbid somebody, what do you do? But what he was interested in was my interest in pensions. And I go, Illinois, I said, man, it's over, man. Whatever, get it, run away. But Arizona and Phoenix is only about 8-10 years behind the same thing.
David Talbot. I'm sorry. Finish.
I don't know what she giving out the information.
Go ahead.
That we're here in the Valley, we're only like 8 years behind Illinois. I mean, they may got head start on us, but we're doing the same thing here. And my comment was, I'm going, the pensions are what's going to nail this entire country. It's where the money's at, it's gone, it's over, it's done. It's like Social Security. All of a sudden, he got off, he's thinking a little bit, and then he's waiting out for me. I was a little bit longer before I got my stuff. And he's out there, walk all the way out, just asking me things about the pensions. And he was a financial guy, and I'm wondering, what sparked his, oh my God, the shoe shine boy knows, so what do you think about the issue?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it's the pensions, but it's everything. It's certainly the pensions, and if you're dependent on one, I'm sorry for you. I can't tell you how criminal these people are that have run these institutions and things. If it doesn't pencil out, if, promises Social Security, they sold you this with, trust fund, you go on their website, it's about insurance, investments, they're investing your money and stuff, and all those things are lies. And the people that propagated their lies are still sitting in high places in the synagogue and in the churches. We still respect them, right? They're our leadership, and they've lied to us about everything. And I told you when I started talking that I had been kind of withdrawn from the public debate for a couple of years, and with this talk, I'm going to start getting back into it a little bit. But I'll tell you one of the events that was disheartening for me about the time that I decided, I'm not going to do this for now. I'm just not going to do this. Was I was on John Stossel's show on Fox, and he had a guy on there, another guy, some liberal, and he always liked to pit two guys against each other, and he had some guy on there, and I was talking about a little bit about the insolvency of the Social Security system. And the guy sitting there said, well, Charles, it doesn't, most Americans don't depend on Social Security. Very few do. And I looked at John, and I looked at this guy, and John didn't say anything, and I thought, well, I'm not going to say anything either then, Let people just absorb what he just said. Let all the people watching the show absorb what he just said, that their Social Security is not that important to him. The guy was an academic. He was a professor, and he's still on TV all the time. Black professor, you see him, I can't remember his name. And it took all the wind out of my sails, and I thought, I don't want to do this anymore, because there's no respect, there's no desire to reach the truth. The desire is to say something so that you can prevail. And I don't want to do it anymore. And so with this, so that's when I just, I'm not done. I'm backing out. Now, exactly why I'm, wanting to re-immerse myself in it now, I'm not exactly sure. Except I have a new book coming out, so that'll be nice. Anyway, yeah, Frank.
A comment and a question. You don't have to film me. I'm face for radio. That's right. But for a quick comment, you mentioned about placebo early on. It's kind of different from the later conversation. I just want to tell people, when I became a physician, I was all set to become a surgeon. I was looking into that direction, and I was working at Merck Pharmaceuticals for some time. Kind of getting my medical cred and chops, getting ready to apply. And one of the things I learned was always placebo. Placebo was always down here. You just kick placebo. It's like, it's all about the drug. And of course, even in alternative medicine, it's always the acupuncture that helped. It's the herbs. It's never placebo. It's amazing how many people talk about placebo at first, but then they poo-poo it once they're indoctrinated into their own modality, whether it's conventional or alternative. And working with Merck Pharmaceuticals, it hit me one day, which is the light bulb that allowed me to transition to quackery, which I am today, which is I sat there and realized I was helping them with phase 4 drug trials. And everyone who says that placebo is a non-factor, these drug companies spend billions of dollars a year to prove that their drug works over the placebo effect.
Yeah.
So the irony is that all the proof you want that's out there are in the vaults of all the pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah.
They're the ones that have done it, which is fascinating. It's kind of the opposite of what you might expect. The question is, I've had a number of people around us, around me, and even with Freedom's Phoenix, some people getting a little frustrated, so to speak, to say, where's the economic collapse? Where is it? It's been going for so long. Everyone keeps talking about it. I know many of us hear this from other people around us. People feeling like they're missing out on the stock gains. I mean, Peter Schiff talks about people that keep pulling out of his accounts. Obviously, it's called math. It's going to come at some point. And with the hockey sticking and everything, I definitely get it. Question is, what would you consider, if at all, some of the last signs, sort of like circling the drain, the canary in the cage of when it's imminent? Any certain specific signs to look for?
I'll give you my best signal for the end game. By the way, those of us that spend our lives in radio really resent that line of yours about a face for radio. I don't ever want to hear that again. Thank you very much. Yeah, the day that foreigners almost en masse or very, very close quit funding American foreign debt. You know, watch Treasury auctions, watch the funding of foreign debt, and this whole thing in the repo market is an early warning signal of what's going on. And they're desperate. You can't keep up with the money that they're pouring into the repo market. And collectively, I guess it's, repeated interventions, it's been as much as 65 trillion or something. But you can't keep up. I try to keep up because I write commentaries. I write private economic commentaries for some of my clients right now. And so I try to keep up, and I can't keep up. It's happening so fast and it's so little disclosed. But the point of that is to keep rates down so that the interest rate explosion doesn't take place. But also, if there is a problem with the solvency of the United States government, it will show up first in foreigners backing away from funding our debt. And actually, you see the telltale signs of that already. You know, the move to gold for central bank reserves is a big part of it. And this is the biggest economic megatrend I view of our times. The biggest early warning system right now is this movement to gold. But watch foreign funding of American sovereign debt. Yeah, Ernie?
We were doing a show on the repo market, try to understand how to explain and so on. And then an economic guy from Winnipeg calls in or texts in and he says, not only is it overnight now, they've extended the repo market to days, weeks, a month, maybe 2.
Yeah.
So this is a check kiting thing, and it's gone. And we're not paying, and this is how they're doing, like subprime loans, they did the toxic assets, the TARP, they took it all, gave dollar for dollar, and they put it on their books. Well, Susan Trimpath just had a new book coming out in January explaining this. She, does short selling and all that kind of stuff. And she's going, there wasn't any asset there. It was just a derivative of a bond of maybe of whatever they got their dollar for dollar, and nobody's going to want it. Nobody's going to liquidate it. It's just going to sit there until the 30-year term runs out or something. So I'm going, okay, there's that. So what they did is now to do the same thing, they buy all these toxic assets and subprime, whatever the heck they call it this week, and in the repo market, they're putting them over as collateral for stuff that they never pay back.
Yeah.
So it's that same thing, just a different way of doing it, and it's imminent what's coming.
It's this is the last thing I'll say. It's just nothing is real. Nothing is real. Nothing that the state does is real. The finances are not real. During the Iraq War, Dick Cheney went on national TV, and he said, well, they're using these aluminum tubes and they're making nuclear weapons there, but don't take it from me, Here it is in the New York Times this morning. And it was the story that his chief of staff, Scooter Libby, gave to Judith Miller at the New York Times so that it would show up on Sunday morning so Dick Cheney could go on Meet the Press and say, but don't take it to me, even though it came from my office. And it's the same thing in the financial system. There's no there. When you trace it back, there's no underlying wealth, there's no underlying reality, there's no underlying value. It's all a paper shuffle, and we're all being victimized by it. Anyway, thank you guys for being so generous with me with your time, and for letting me speak here, and for letting me kind of come out after this long period of hibernation and stuff, and it's nice to be here. Thank you.